I always believed my brothers were my unshakable pillars, the ones who shielded me from the world's storms. But one summer afternoon, a single moment shattered those walls. What I thought was innocent closeness turned into something so confusing, so overwhelming, it left me questioning everything I knew about love, trust, and boundaries. I'm Nancy, the youngest in a family of 5. Growing up in the heart of Boston, life always felt vibrant, full of love, and safe within the walls of our home. My parents, though busy with their demanding careers, Dad as a corporate lawyer and Mom as an art curator, always ensured we had everything we needed. But it wasn't their presence that made me feel secure. It was my 2 older brothers, Anthony and Jacob. They were my heroes, strong, protective, and always ready to defend me, whether from school bullies or my own insecurities. Anthony, the eldest, was the calm and logical one, always there with advice and reassurance. Jacob, on the other hand, was playful and quick-witted, his sense of humor capable of brightening even my worst days. Together, they made me feel invincible, as if nothing bad could ever touch me. Being the youngest, I was undoubtedly spoiled. Anthony and Jacob treated me like their little princess, always ensuring I felt special. From walking me to school to sneaking me candy when Mom said no, their affection was endless. We had our little rituals like late-night talks on the porch or movie marathons in the living room. I trusted them more than anyone in the world, and they trusted me. But that summer, as I turned 18, something shifted. I started to notice things I hadn't before. How their glances lingered just a second longer, or how their teasing sometimes felt more intense. Maybe it was my imagination, or maybe I was finally growing up. Either way, I brushed it off, clinging to the belief that our bond was pure and unshakable. Little did I know, a single moment would blur the lines between innocence and something far more complicated, leaving scars that no amount of time could heal. It started with subtle shifts, things I could have easily overlooked if I hadn't been so attuned to Anthony and Jacob. At first, it was little moments. Anthony pausing mid-sentence when I'd catch him staring, or Jacob's sudden need to leave the room whenever I walked in wearing casual shorts or a tank top. I chalked it up to overthinking. After all, we'd always been so close. Why would anything change now? But as the summer days dragged on, the atmosphere around us began to feel heavier. Anthony, once the steady and composed one, grew restless, his usual calm demeanor replaced by tension. Jacob, on the other hand, became quieter, his jokes fewer, his glances more fleeting, but somehow charged with an energy I couldn't place. It was as though an invisible line had been drawn between us, one none of us dared to cross but couldn't ignore. One evening, while lounging in the living room after dinner, Jacob teased me about my clumsiness during a family board game. His comment was innocent enough, but the way Anthony looked at me, half smiling yet oddly serious, made my skin tingle. I laughed it off, trying to ignore the flutter in my chest. Later that night, as I walked past their rooms to get a glass of water, I heard muffled voices. It wasn't unusual for them to stay up late talking, but the tone was different, hushed, almost urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but my name cut through the quiet, stopping me in my tracks. I pressed my hand against the wall, my heartbeat quickening as I strained to hear. Nancy wouldn't understand. "Just forget it, Jacob," Anthony muttered, his voice low and firm. My throat tightened. What wouldn't I understand? Why did they sound so conflicted? A part of me wanted to knock on the door and demand answers, but fear held me back. I hurried back to my room, my mind spinning with questions. From that moment on, I started noticing every little thing. How Anthony's hand lingered a second too long when he brushed my hair away from my face, or how Jacob would look away whenever our eyes met. These weren't the brothers I grew up with. Something had changed, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to find out what it was. One sultry summer afternoon, the tension reached a boiling point. The house was quiet. Our parents were out attending a charity gala, leaving just the 3 of us at home. I decided to spend the afternoon in the living room, curled up with a book. Anthony and Jacob were already there, watching a movie. They seemed unusually quiet, their usual playful banter absent. I joined them, settling onto the sofa between the 2. The movie was romantic, with moments so intense that I found myself drawn in despite my initial disinterest. At one point, the characters on screen shared a passionate embrace, and I noticed Anthony and Jacob exchanging glances. My heart fluttered as if I'd been caught doing something I shouldn't. "You're blushing," Jacob teased, nudging me with his elbow. "I'm not." I shot back, playfully shoving him, though I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks. Anthony chuckled softly, his hand brushing against mine as he reached for the remote. The The contact was brief, but it sent an unexpected jolt through me. I quickly looked away, pretending to focus on the movie, but my mind was racing. Why was I suddenly so aware of every movement, every glance? Why did it feel like the air around us had thickened? As the evening wore on, the movie ended, but none of us moved. The room was heavy with an unspoken energy that made me feel both nervous and curious. I shifted in my seat, and my leg brushed against Jacob's. He didn't pull away, nor did I. Instead, he turned to me, his expression unreadable. "You've grown up so much, Nancy," he said quietly, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Sometimes I forget you're not a little kid anymore." His words hung in the air, laden with meaning I couldn't fully grasp. Anthony cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "You'll always be our little sister," he said, though his tone lacked its usual conviction. Feeling overwhelmed, I stood abruptly. "I think I need some air," I muttered, heading toward the back porch. The cool night breeze did little to calm the storm inside me. My heart was racing, my mind replaying every look, every touch, every word. What was happening to us? To me. Minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Anthony and Jacob standing there, their expressions a mix of concern and something else. Something I couldn't name, but felt deep in my chest. They joined me on the porch, and for a moment, we just stood there in silence, the tension between us palpable. "Nancy," Anthony began, his voice hesitant. "There's something we need to talk about." My pulse quickened. "What is it?" Neither of them answered right away. Instead, they exchanged a glance that seemed to say more than words ever could. Finally, Jacob took a step closer, his gaze locking onto mine. "We care about you more than anything. You know that, right?" "I know," I whispered, though my voice trembled. But deep down, I knew this conversation wasn't just about love or family. It was about something far more complicated, something that would change everything. That night, everything unraveled. The moment that had been building all summer finally broke through, shattering the fragile balance we had been clinging to. It started innocently enough, as most life-changing moments do. After the tense exchange on the porch, I retreated to my room, hoping for a reprieve from the confusing emotions swirling inside me. Sleep was elusive, and every little sound from the house seemed amplified in the silence. A faint knock at my door jolted me upright. "It's me," Anthony's voice came through softly. "Can I come in?" I hesitated but eventually said, "Yeah." He stepped inside, his expression unreadable. Jacob followed close behind, shutting the door quietly. They both looked at me like they were searching for the right words, their usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Anthony sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We need to talk about everything." Jacob sat down on the edge of my bed, his gaze fixed on the floor. "We can't keep pretending nothing's changed, Nancy. You feel it too, don't you?" The air felt heavy, my heart pounding as I tried to process what they were saying. I don't know what you mean," I stammered, though the heat rising in my cheeks betrayed me. "Come on," Anthony said gently, sitting down beside me. "We've all been feeling it. This thing between us. It's not the same anymore." The room spun as their words sank in. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off as a misunderstanding, but the truth was written in the way my body reacted to their presence, in the unspoken tension that had grown too large to ignore. "This is wrong," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "We're family." Jacob reached for my hand, his touch warm and steady. "We know it's complicated, but we've never cared about anyone the way we care about you. That hasn't changed." Anthony leaned closer, his voice soft but firm. "We're not asking for anything. We just needed to say it out loud." For a moment, the three of us sat there, the silence between us thick with unspoken truths and impossible emotions. I wanted to run, to pretend this conversation never happened, but a part of me couldn't let go of the connection I felt with them. Deeper than friendship, stronger than blood. "Whatever happens," Anthony said finally, "we'll figure it out together." "You mean everything to us, Nancy. That's never going to change." I nodded, my throat tight with emotions I couldn't name. The boundaries between us had been broken, and there was no going back. Whatever came next, it would change us forever. The days following that conversation felt surreal, as though I was living someone else's life. The air between us was heavy with unspoken words, every glance loaded with meaning I didn't know how to process. My once carefree relationship with Anthony and Jacob had become something I couldn't define, something that weighed on my chest like a stone. We tried to go back to normal. At breakfast, they joked about Mom's overcooked pancakes, and I laughed along, but the smiles didn't reach our eyes. At night, I would lie awake in bed, the memory of that evening playing on a loop in my mind. I kept asking myself the same question. Had I done something to cross this line? Or were we all just caught in a web of emotions too complex to unravel? One afternoon, Mom and Dad announced they'd be out of town for a weekend conference. Normally, I'd look forward to spending that time with Anthony and Jacob, but now, the thought of being alone with them filled me with both anticipation and dread. The first night, we ordered pizza and watched an old comedy we used to love as kids. For a while, it felt like nothing had changed, until the jokes faded, and we were left in silence. Jacob turned to me, his expression soft but serious. "Nancy, we need to talk about us," he said, his voice barely audible. Anthony nodded, his gaze steady. "We can't keep ignoring this." Panic rose in my chest. "There is no this," I said quickly, my voice trembling. "We're family. We can't." "We're not saying we want to change that," Jacob interrupted. "But we can't pretend we don't feel what we feel." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "This isn't right. What happened to us? We used to be normal, close. Why did it have to get so complicated?" Anthony reached out, his hand resting lightly on mine. "We're not trying to hurt you, Nancy. We can't lie about how much you mean to us." I pulled away, standing abruptly. "You don't get it. This isn't about me, it's about all of us. If we cross this line, there's no going back. We'll destroy everything." Their silence spoke volumes. They knew I was right, but the tension between us had already changed our dynamic irreparably. That night, I stayed in my room, trying to convince myself that things could return to normal. But deep down, I knew the damage was done. In the following weeks, I tried to put distance between us. I focused on friends, spent more time outside the house, and avoided moments where we'd be alone together. Anthony and Jacob respected my space, though I could feel their longing to repair the bond we'd shared. Despite my efforts, the guilt lingered. I'd lost the simple, loving relationship we once had, replaced by something far more fragile and confusing. The foundation of trust we'd built over years had cracked, and I wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. In the months that followed, I worked hard to rebuild the boundaries that had once felt so natural. It wasn't easy. Every interaction with Anthony and Jacob was tinged with a vulnerability we all tried to hide. The closeness we once shared had been replaced by guarded smiles and awkward silences. I eventually left for college, putting miles between us in hopes of finding clarity. Being away helped. It gave me space to sort through my feelings and to remind myself of the love we shared before everything became so tangled. I realized that love, real, untainted love, was about respect and boundaries, and that we'd all cross lines we shouldn't have. When I came home for the holidays, things felt different. Anthony and Jacob seemed more like their old selves, playful, protective, but with a new layer of caution in how they treated me. I appreciated their effort to rebuild what we'd lost, even if it would never be the same. One night, during a quiet family dinner, I caught Jacob glancing at me across the table. His gaze was warm, reassuring, and I saw something I hadn't in months: understanding. Later, when we were alone in the living room, he broke the silence. "Nancy, I know we messed up," he said softly. "I'll always regret the way things happened, but I hope you know how much we love you." I nodded, tears brimming in my eyes. "I do. I love you both, but we can't go back to how things were. It's going to take time, for all of us." Anthony joined us then, his expression earnest. "No matter what, we're still your brothers. That's what matters most." Hearing those words gave me a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. I knew it wouldn't erase the pain or confusion, but it was a step toward healing. Slowly, we began to rebuild. Not as the carefree trio we once were, but as siblings learning to navigate a more complicated relationship. Looking back, I've realized how dangerous it is to let curiosity and emotion blur the lines of trust. I've learned that some boundaries are there for a reason, to protect what matters most. Love isn't about testing those limits, it's about honoring them, even when it's hard. To anyone who finds themselves in a situation like mine, I can only offer this advice. Don't let fleeting emotions jeopardize what's most important. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out, they're the foundation of healthy, lasting relationships. As for me, I still hold on to hope that one day, the guilt and confusion will fade, leaving only the love that started it all. If you were in Nancy's shoes, what would you have done? Have you ever experienced a moment where emotions blurred boundaries? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that explore life's most complicated relationships. Stay tuned for next week's story. It's one you won't want to miss.